Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining our session on change management best practices for EPM adoption. I'm Maritza Armagon, and Brittany Ulrich and I are going to be your tour guides for the next 45 minutes as we journey through the principles of change management and user adoption. By means of introduction, I'm a CPA with an MBA specialty in IT. So implementing Hyperion was the perfect marriage of my education. For the last 25 years, I've been designing and leading large-scale technology-enabled finance process transformations. As you were joining the session, I asked you to respond to a polling question. Literally 3 words, grammatically probably not actually a question, but a few of you were responded. So it didn't actually need greater explanation. Yet in 1985, Coke failed to recognize its brand loyalty when it attempted to introduce New Coke. I say attempted because New Coke was pulled from the market 79 days after it was introduced. Why was New Coke such a failure? Probably a multitude of reasons, but 2 of the biggest reasons was 1, Coke failed to communicate the introduction of new product and why they were changing a 100-year-old formula. And 2, they over-indexed on 1 data point. Blind taste tests. They were being edged out by Pepsi, but when you think about, but they failed to appreciate the fact that you don't typically take 1 sip. When you consumed an entire can of New Coke, the sweetness was overwhelming for typical Coke drinkers. They didn't account for the end-to-end user experience or the feelings of the consumers that they were serving. By contrast, Netflix put themselves in their consumers' shoes. And they transform their businesses with their users in mind. Consumers prefer to watch what they want, when they want it. And by introducing streaming services, Netflix freed users from planning ahead for movie night and provided real-time entertainment without ads. And the result? Well, I think these numbers speak for themselves. So what can we learn from this as we embark on our EPM projects? New Coke and Netflix are universally understood as an epic fail and a huge success, respectively. And the difference was user adoption. Strong change management and user adoption increases the likelihood of meeting your program objectives 6-fold. So what is change management? Before I share my interpretation of change management, I'd like to get your thoughts. So in 1 word, how would you describe change management? Again, the instructions are at the top of the poll or on top of the slide. And you can answer multiple times. You can either use your computer to respond or you can use a smartphone to text your response. Great answers, and I think these are great lead-ins. The easiest way to think about change management in my mind is if you put yourself in your internal customer's shoes. What would you want if you were on the receiving end of the change? You'd want to know what was the change, when it was coming, You'd want to know how you would benefit from the change and how it would impact your current job, if and when you would be receiving training so you could be confident about the job, and what kind of job aids would be available as you were climbing your learning curve. Oftentimes when projects are undertaken, there's a kickoff and some design workshops and then radio silence until the announcement of training. Change management introduces a constant stream of communication to deliver bite-sized pieces of information on the new solution so that users have time to digest the change. People are creatures of habit. They need time to acclimate to change slowly. So we interact early and often throughout the implementation to make users feel like they're part of the change. Because let's be honest, ultimately they decide if the project is a success or a failure. So let's talk about some easy things to do, starting with a project kickoff, led by a C-level executive who can communicate the need for the change and the strategic requirements and the strategic initiatives. Next, business requirement site visits. When you're gathering requirements, go to them on their turf. But when you're holding detailed design workshops, bring everybody together in one place to share leading practice and agree to solutions so they understand how you arrive at the design. Admittedly, this can be a little difficult in the existing physically distanced environment, but with Zoom and WebEx and other virtual tools, we've been very successful. One thing you might not be taking advantage of, unless you're familiar with ERP implementations, are conference room pilots. They can be as simple as demonstrations of working model with process flows to introduce the new solution, or as elaborate and complex as workshops where users work through each of the models under your direction. You can also do unit tests with stakeholders for a smaller scale. Unit tests and CRPs are great starting points and introductions to user acceptance testing. On a smaller scale, you work with users to identify bugs and fix any snags so that when you get to user acceptance testing, you've collected all of the low-hanging fruit and hopefully eliminated most, if not all, of your defects. Another key component to user acceptance testing is data validation. EPM users are predominantly accountants and financial analysts. If they don't recognize data and they think it's wrong, it becomes a distraction to the functionality and they don't think the system works. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So a smooth UAT is a hallmark of a successful implementation. Another obvious key to user adoption is successful training. It's not just the act of training itself, it's the communication leading up to the training and the job aids that support following training and go live. Hopefully, your stakeholders have now participated in a CRP, in unit testing, in UAT, and so training is now the fourth interaction with the system. Bite-sized interactions so they have time to digest the solution. You'll notice a few more formal change management activities like stakeholder assessments and change impact analysis. As your projects become larger and more pervasive in the organization, it's important to understand your stakeholder base. Who's a supporter? Who's a naysayer? Get the naysayers involved in the project quickly in a very meaningful way to turn them into supporters, especially if they're admired or outspoken members of the team. Of course, this isn't an exhaustive list of change management activities, and there's no one size fits all. Every organization is different. But it's important to understand the culture of an organization and apply the appropriate change management techniques. Unfortunately, change management is typically the first line item to be cut from the budget. But what procurement fails to realize is that you can build a great system, but if no one uses it, if they go back to their old spreadsheets, then the whole project was a waste of time and money. So I'll leave you with that thought. One final polling question before I turn it over to Brittany. In which project phase do you think change management is most helpful? And again, you can select multiple answers. I guess it was kind of a trick question. So with that, Brittany, I will hand it over to you.
Hi, Marita, thank you. And hopefully we can see my screen. It's like I'm sharing. So thank you so much for passing it over to me, Marisa. Today I'd like to talk about myself some and then a recent project I worked on within Humana where change management and communication strategy really came into play, and it was really important for our success in that EPM adoption. So a little bit about me. My name's Brittany. I'm a technology implementation lead at Humana. I've been working for Humana for 8 years, and 5 of those years leading corporate FP&A projects to build and support adoption for planning and S-based apps. I'm also a CPA and began my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I met my husband. We've been married 7 years. We have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and one more on the way in October. So things are chaotic around here, which that picture kind of shows what life is like right now, where we're always chasing kiddos around. I enjoy time with family and friends, reading, and often home renovation projects at 9 o'clock at night once kiddos are in bed and you know, my husband's trying to sleep, and that's when I decide to start painting a room. So I'm always working on projects, whether it's at home or at work. It seems like that's the way of my world. And then just a fun fact about me is that I've been terrified of water my entire life, but I learned to swim at 32 because of mostly fear of missing out. My kiddos were in the deep end with my husband, and I was jealous and wanted to be part of it, but also didn't want to pass that fear to them. So moving on to the project here. Today I really wanted to talk about the recent project that I worked on to lift all of our planning applications from our on-premise servers to EPM. Specifically, we're using Planning and Budgeting Cloud Services and Enterprise Planning and Budgeting Cloud Services. The scope of that project includes about 400 EPM users across multiple applications. From start to finish, from analysis to 100% EPM adoption, it took about 19 months, and that includes, even starting with contracting and analysis of whether we were going to move forward with that project. In that 19 months, we had 16 release cycles, and we had a project team of about 8 team members working on strategy, communication, technical development, technical pathway to development, and we also had a separate development team to support us, but the core project team was about 8 team members for planning purposes. So how did we get from start to finish on that project? I look at this really in several phases, but I've bucketed it into 3 main phases of the project. The first was really us completing this huge puzzle that included a financial picture and a roadmap and contracting and communication across the organization and make sure we had support and buy-in. Completing that puzzle is kind of an understatement. It was more like completing the puzzle while we were in a moving car or even a boat. A lot of times we would work towards getting a puzzle and have a plan to move forward, and then something would change or impact that from either a financial or contracting perspective, and we'd have to revisit that puzzle. However, that first phase was so important for planning so that we could communicate with our leaders to make sure that we had support. Humana does have a cloud-first strategy, so we typically had support, but they also needed to know details, right? That's the high-level vision, and we need to make sure that they're on board with the actual roadmap and financial picture that we're presenting. So communicating to them at that, what those key decisions would need to be in order to move forward, that was critical for us to move to phase 2. The next phase of our project involved strategizing, developing, testing, and kind of a rinse and repeat there. So once we had a really confident roadmap, we had support from leaders to move forward to make these purchases. Once we had that support and buy-in and a confident roadmap, we approached our users with our plan. Understanding that they were impacted heavily by our project and our plan to move everything to EPM Cloud, we needed their buy-in and to make sure that they were given the chance to give feedback on our plan, where we recognized that we understood our users and we could, to some extent, make some assumptions about what would work for them. We also didn't want to make them feel left out or that the change that was coming wasn't part of, that they didn't have a say. So communicating with them early about our roadmap to ensure that we were able to move forward with development was really critical to success. And then we also, in line with beginning development work and performing testing, which are key elements of a project and obviously really important, we developed a really broad and reusable communication strategy to inform our users and promote adoption. And then finally, that communication really came into play again once we got closer to the actual go live for each application. So within each one of those releases, I mentioned we had a reusable communication plan. We would reach out to our users to let them know the date we discussed previously, the project we discussed previously, it's coming, it's upon us, it's here. So they would get a communication in advance of a prod turn and go live, and then they would experience the prod turn and go live, and then they would get a communication to say, we did it, we went live and we're in production, and now you have a dual support period so that you can feel confident with everything we've done to this step that you still have what you need. So they would get that communication and have that dual support period to allow for their validation and provide any feedback. And then once that dual support period was over, and I mentioned we had 6 cube I'm not sure if I did mention that we had 5 or 6 half hearing cube administrators. So that dual support period was handled by those cube administrators to support our users with both their on-premise and cloud applications during that period. And then once that period was over, they got another communication saying, we are going to sunset the on-premise application. Just want to make sure you're aware of that and that you are prepared for that. And then we would actually go forward with that sunset plan. So, it's on purpose here that communication is highlighted and is it's in every phase of our project. It was critical. Like I said, it helped us really move forward with each, from one phase to the next, and within each phase, that was the only way that we were able to actually make forward progress. And, even prior to my involvement in this project, we had been discussing this move to EPM Cloud for years prior to that. And we hadn't made much progress other than kind of, getting in a room and talking about what we were going to do. It was obvious that it was because our communication at times wasn't always to all impacted stakeholders. And so without that buy-in, being able to move forward and make forward progress on that project, it just wasn't possible. It was all theoretical at that point, and we weren't actually able to accomplish what we were setting out to do there. So I also wanted to take a step back and just talk about my area some. In that I see us as serving internal customers within Humana. I work for an area called the Business Informatics Shared Services, and we're essentially an internal consulting group. So we do recognize that our customers have other options. They can go to other areas outside of our group specifically. They can devise their own solutions, and they can use an external consulting firm. So we recognize that we have competition, and wanted to make sure that our users experienced change in a way that wasn't painful. I saw pain as one of the word clouds that came up on Maritza's slide a few minutes ago, that painful or necessary. That's true that change can be both of those things. So we were hoping that a really robust communication strategy would help alleviate some of that pain that they had to live through. There was so much that we could do to try to alleviate that pain up front, but it is just the nature of the beast that, you're going to experience some growing pains as you change. So recognizing that there was an impact to the system and downstream impacts, we wanted to kind of mitigate that shock of change by communicating early and often. So I'm personally a strong believer in value-added communication, not communication just to communicate, but making sure that you have the appropriate audience on communication, that the message is appropriate and detailed enough to provide valuable information, and that it's clear and concise so that you're not losing your audience. And in doing so, and being proactive with that communication strategy, especially during mass changes like this, where we're talking about impacting that many users, that many downstream processes, it creates a feedback loop that for us as a project team allowed us to validate that we were on the right track, and not hearing those naysayers, but hearing support or thumbs up, or at times some questions that may lead to changes to our project or impact the way that we were planning. That feedback loop was critical to us to make sure that we had a successful adoption. As Maritza said, and I fully agree with this, that you can develop and build and create something perfect, but if you don't have user buy-in, and if they don't understand the change that's coming, it's throwaway work. They'll go back to something else, and they will devise a different solution. So that communication was key to make sure that we gave them the chance to ask questions. They felt informed and were able to make a plan for themselves. Like I mentioned, we're really a consulting group, so there's only so much we can do as far as adoption. the FP&A teams using the actual tools had to make sure that they also agreed with the project, were okay with the dates communicated. They were actually part of those decisions to help solidify the dates that we proposed. We made sure that we approached every group in each release to make sure that those dates worked for them, that there weren't any other unknowns that we weren't aware of that would be a bad time for a go live. And in that way, again, we just reduced our risk from having to throw away or change a go live date, and we were actually able to hit every go live date, every release that we planned on from start to finish. That's not to say there weren't some kind of late nights and reworking of the plan, again, reworking of the puzzle while we were driving the car. Some of that happened, but we did manage to hit every single one of those go live dates and dual support periods, and we're fully migrated to the cloud at this point for all of our EPM applications. So, in that way, I would say that more communications, not less. We definitely steered the car to the way of over-communicate, or at least send frequent communications with the right message to the right audience. All right, so the next slide that I've got really here is our detailed communication plan and what we were able to deliver to our users and our other project stakeholders so that they felt informed. So aside from communication and having a robust communication strategy, obviously there are other elements to a project and to making sure that you have a successful adoption and managing through that change. Training is definitely an important one. Marisa had gone through several of those other key, making sure you have a robust test plan and training and providing materials. We did have those resource docs. We did have training. We also met regularly as a project team to make sure that our plan was still valid and in sync, and that we were revisiting that project plan from top to bottom, side to side, and it still worked to meet our needs. But I'd say the thread that ran through the whole project was always staying in communication with everyone and making sure that everyone had the message they needed to be successful. So the communication strategy that we had was we met weekly with the core project team. We met weekly with our development team, and then actually daily during UAT to make sure that things were staying on track. We actually met daily as well during our post-prod validation to make sure that everything looked okay in production after the turn. We had monthly communications to inform our Hyperion EPM administrators, including any updates to the roadmap, any changes to our project work, and then we had some lab demos so that those administrators who would be a first round of testers on the applications that were turned to the cloud, we had lab demos to make sure that they could at least see the tool in advance of their testing window. We also held a mid-migration kind of ask anything session, and once again, that was not purposely to look for the naysayers, but it was to see, is there anything looming out there that maybe hasn't yet been asked, or there's someone who has thoughts or concerns or issues that haven't been expressed yet. We've been communicating out all of this time. We need to make sure that we give everyone the opportunity to have more of a free-form discussion if they have anything to ask about the project or the technical implementation, anything. So we did have that mid-migration Ask Anything session, and we got some good feedback there on what people knew versus what they maybe had heard of but needed more information on. We also had really broad communications to our entire user population, so that, I mentioned we had multiple releases, so they would get targeted communications specific to their release. But at times, even though those users might be impacted by this release for their core processes, they sometimes had secondary needs that were where they were impacted by another release. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a communication strategy where everyone felt in the loop with the entire project plan, and then they had really detailed specific information and reference materials specific to their release. And then we also had broad communications to leaders to kind of update them on what was going on, since they were our original, you know, thumbs up, thumbs down on moving forward with the plan that we had in place. I would say that during 2020, our project started at the very, very beginning of 2019. So really January 2019 was that kickoff of our first proof of concept work. We got through a lot of that in 2019 and then the beginning of 2020, and we continue to see an uptick within our area that serves these finance customers. We continue to see an uptick in requests for new EPM adoption. So aside from the cloud migration where we impacted 400 finance users, we're now seeing just a windfall of new requests for EPM applications to be built to serve a custom need, changes to EPM applications to help put more into that EPM application than they've ever, in a more robust way than they've ever used it before. So we're kind of taking that as a win that we didn't lose any of our customers during this EPM migration, and in fact, have gained more, I guess you would say, market share and further, penetrated within our existing market, so that we're using the tools that we've heavily invested in, that we're using those in a more robust way and more broadly throughout the organization, which helps promote our finance users and their tools to be able to be more in sync. So overall, that's a win for us as an area to continue to target those finance customers. And I do think our communication strategy and ability to kind of hold hands and work as partners with our finance team through that change management makes it a little less painful for them. So that's really what I had for today. I think I'm going to kick it over to Allie for questions.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions for Maritza or Brittany, you can put them in the Q&A and I can facilitate that. There doesn't seem to be any questions. We'll hold on for just an extra, oh, looks like we got one. Any plans to manage ongoing changes through a different process?
I think that's for me.
Yes, I believe so.
Allie, yeah. So we have talked before about an actual change management office that would help our users, but I think at this point we continue to do it kind of project by project. The strategy that we adopted for our cloud project to have those an actual communication strategy. I mentioned we had a project team of 8. Within that project team, we had I guess I would consider myself in that project team as the super product owner, but we had product owners within our project, so that everyone had their own work stream within the project, right? There was a technical piece and a communication piece and then a user training piece. And so while I listened in on every single one of those, the communication piece was the one that I feel like I drove the most as far as making sure that we built something, I guess, new. The technical integration piece, we have an IT team and they led that, and then the training piece, our production support team was able to help us through that. So the communication part was the that was the piece that we didn't have anything for yet, and we kind of had to come up with a blank page. I'd say if we had a project of this scale again, we would probably revisit what we did and see what worked well, and likely leverage that for those projects. But we have talked about how nice it would be to have a change management office. And then I know for, really large scale projects, even larger than this, that would be more enterprise wide, we would typically work with a lot of times we work with an implementation partner to help manage through some of that change as well.
Awesome, thanks, Brittany. Are there any other questions for our presenters? Okay, if not, I just want to let everybody who's on know that Edward is coming back at 2 o'clock to do a brief wrap up. And then shortly after that, you'll receive an email to attend our networking session. So it'll be at the top of your inbox around 1:50, and it'd be awesome if you could all join and we can talk about anything and everything Oracle EPM analytics and healthcare payer. So thank you so much, Brittany, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Allie.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.